The ticket costs $1,400, Dad. You haven't paid. Mark's voice cut through the chatter in the hallway, sharp and merciless, drawing curious glances from the line of relatives waiting to enter the ballroom. My steps faltered, as though he had swung a heavy door shut in front of me. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, but no, his words were deliberate, meant to sting in front of everyone. I tried to steady my breath. Only 2 days earlier, I had written him a check for $45,000, my hand trembling as I signed away the last reserve of savings built over decades. Now, in front of cousins, aunts, uncles, he stood like a gatekeeper, dismissing me as if I were a stranger trying to sneak into my own family reunion. The lights above gleamed in soft gold, the clinking of glasses, and the faint notes of a string quartet slipping from the open doors. Yet all I could feel was the sudden heaviness in my chest. Tika reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, fingers brushing the envelope where I had carefully folded my bank receipt. "Mark," I said quietly, "I already gave you." He cut me off, his eyes narrowed with impatience. "That was for me. This is different. You don't just walk in for free because you're my father." The air shifted. A murmur rippled through the waiting line, people shifting uncomfortably, pretending not to stare while staring all the same. Stephanie, his wife, stepped up beside him. Her perfume carried a sharp floral bite, her manicured nails tapping against her clutch. She didn't raise her voice, but the disdain dripped as surely as acid. "Mark, don't waste your time. If he can't afford a ticket, maybe he shouldn't be here." I swallowed hard. The weight of humiliation pressed on my shoulders, heavier than any burden my age had given me. At 70, I was no stranger to being overlooked, but being branded a freeloader by my own son in front of kin was something altogether different. I shifted my weight forward, intent on walking past him into the ballroom regardless. The soft strains of music and laughter beckoned like a sanctuary. Mark's arm shot out, palm flat against my chest. His touch was not the reassuring gesture of a son, but the barrier of an enforcer. "You're not listening," he growled. The push came suddenly. My body jerked backward, shoulders slamming against the frame of the doorway. Pain flared hot through my joint, sharp enough to make me gasp. My vision blurred for a second, the overhead lights fragmenting into cruel halos. The murmur turned into a gasp from the crowd. Feet shuffled, but no one stepped forward. No one caught me. I steadied myself against the wall, my knees trembling from both impact and shame. The sting in my shoulder pulsed with each heartbeat, the flesh already aching where I knew a bruise would blossom by morning. For all my years of providing, guiding, and standing tall, I had never imagined a day when my own flesh and blood would lay hands on me like this. Mark didn't even look sorry. His jaw was set, his fists clenched at his sides. Stephanie's lips curved faintly as if the scene confirmed what she had always believed, that I was a burden to be managed, not a man to be honored. Around us, laughter from inside the ballroom floated through the open doors, oblivious to the small act of violence at its threshold. I drew in a shaky breath, eyes fixed on my son's face. Anger and heartbreak churned inside me, neither strong enough to erase the other. My voice came low but steady, a truth I could not leave unspoken. "You just did something," I whispered, my throat tightening, "that no son should ever do to his father." The laughter broke out as Mark held up a cropped group chat. It rolled down the hallway like a passing train, bright and careless, leaving me standing in the draft of its wake. Faces turned, then tilted away. People smiled into their plastic flute glasses as if what he'd shown them was a charming family joke instead of a sharpened blade. He angled the glowing screen so a ring of cousins and in-laws could read the snippets. Names were clipped, timestamps trimmed, my lines lifted without the messages around them. "See?" he said with a little shrug, a performer feigning modesty. "The 45,000 was for me. Dad said so." He flicked his thumb across the glass, more cropped bubbles slid into view like cards from a dealer's hand. "This event has its own budget. Rules are rules." Said, "Let him in." No one reached for the door. The corridor smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and a whiff of roast beef drifting from the ballroom. Music stumbled and recovered behind the doors, some old standard with a soft drum brush shuffle. I could hear silverware chiming against plates, the kind of small music that usually calms a room. Tonight it made the silence around me louder. Mark, I said, careful with my breath, careful with the ache in my shoulder. Those messages are incomplete. You know they are. You took. Premature. He threw the word like a towel over my mouth. This is not the place to argue. We're holding up the line. His smile at the crowd was a friendly mask, all teeth and ease. He gets confused about the details, he added, just sotto voce, enough to carry. The circle of relatives rippled with sympathy, not for me, but for the discomfort of being near an awkward scene. Someone checked a watch with exaggerated patience. Another coughed into a fist, as if clearing a path for the noise to pass. The hallway lights were cool and even. They made everyone's faces look smoother, kinder, younger, and somehow more distant. I tried again, keeping my voice even. The check cleared. It paid for this hall, the food, the band. You know that. Mark lifted the phone higher, the blue-white glow punching into my eyes. Screenshots don't lie, he told me. Use it to get on your feet. He looked over the top edge of the phone. That's what I'm doing. Stephanie slid half a step forward. Her smile turned down at one corner, the kind people wear when discussing an embarrassing neighbor. You're making us look bad, she said, each word clipped neat as a manicure. Please don't cause a scene. Her gaze slipped past me to someone she wanted to impress behind my shoulder, then back with a practiced pity. Let's not ruin a lovely night. The laughers didn't laugh this time. They did something worse. They softened. A sympathetic tilt of the head. A purse of the lips that said, poor man. I watched it happen like weather. First the breeze, then the cloud. How a group finds a shape and fills it until the shape becomes the story. I felt the old animal instinct rise in me, the one that tells you to step toward firelight even after it has burned you. My shoulder still hurts from the doorframe, I said, more to myself than to any of them. The pain had a steady throb now, a metronome I could not switch off. I set my feet, willing them not to shuffle backward, and thought of the morning sun in my kitchen window, the way it lands on the same square of oak each day and warms it without asking anything in return. Mark lowered the phone to hip height, victory poised in the hinge of his elbow. This isn't personal, he said, as if announcing policy. We agreed on a system. You didn't follow it. He gestured toward the ballroom doors. Other people paid for their tickets. It wouldn't be fair. Not fair. The words landed oddly, like an heirloom clock ticking in the wrong rhythm. $45,000 in black ink. The hours of work those digits contained. The winter nights spent double-checking spreadsheets long after my eyes began to fog. Margaret's voice, small and firm, reminding me to be careful and kind. Not fair. Stabilize you want, I said. The corridor dimmed a fraction, the building's HVAC sighing perhaps, or my focus narrowing. It's permission to forget. Blinked, thrown for a beat. Then the mask was back. Look, everyone's waiting. And they were, aunts with careful hair, cousins in pressed shirts, a teenager picking at a blister on her heel, a man I didn't recognize, holding a gift bag with tissue paper sprouting like a white flame. None of them moved. If kindness was in this hallway, it had taken the form of stillness. I lifted my chin the smallest degree I could manage, without seeming to defy the architecture of the moment. I wanted to say to each face, I paid for your chair, your plate, the water in your glass. I wanted to say, I kept the promises I made to a woman you barely knew. Instead, I took a slow breath and tried to speak plainly to my son. Those messages you're showing leave out everything that matters, I said. Context matters, history matters, family matters. Tilted the screen again, letting the cropped lines glow like a verdict. Everyone can read, he said. The verdict did not need a judge. It came in glances, down, away, through me, in a shiver of shoulders, in the way space opened between my shoes and the nearest pair, as if the floor had quietly rearranged its tiles. A freeloader. That's what their faces said without moving. A man trying to slip in for free. Imprisoned swelled behind the doors, horns now, bright and brassy, and I wondered if they would play anything slow tonight. Anything you could hold a memory to. The citrus scent sharpened, or perhaps my senses did. I could feel the fabric of my jacket tug slightly where my shoulder had swelled. My breath found a steadier lane. I won't argue with a phone, I said softly. It doesn't know what I gave. No one answered. Somewhere ice slid in a pitcher, somewhere a chair leg scraped and stopped. Thomas slipped a hand into his jacket and drew out his bank ledger. Line back. I signed 45,000 2 days ago, I said as I set my bank ledger on the checking counter. The vinyl cover made a small, unremarkable sound against the wood, quiet, practical, the kind of sound that never makes a crowd turn. I wished the truth were louder. I wished it could drown out the glassy laughter, the clatter of cutlery, the band warming up somewhere beyond the doors. But paper has its own voice. It speaks in dates and routing numbers, in signatures that never raise themselves. Baseball behind the counter glanced at me, then at Mark, seeking instruction the way a compass seeks north. Her name tag read, Claire. The ballroom lights were bright enough to make everything look clean and uncomplicated. I opened the ledger with careful fingers and slid out the printed statement. My shoulder tugged in protest. One more reminder of the doorframe's edge from earlier, and I placed the page so Claire could see the bolded amount, the line where the check cleared, the bank's emblem that gave the numbers a crest and a flag. Conscious warm enough for company, we've been through this. He turned slightly, angling himself toward the cluster of relatives who had followed us from the hallway. He's confusing things again. Read the date, I told Claire, not taking my eyes off my son. Read the payee. Read the memo line. Demolished mouth made a small O as her eyes moved. She was young. You could see the weight of wanting to do the right thing tilt her shoulders. Then she looked to Mark again. He smiled, easy and bright. That was an investment, he said, a soft laugh tucked into the last syllable, as if we were sharing a family anecdote. Not a ticket. Something inside me clicked shut. An investment, I repeated, to hear how the words sounded in my mouth. 45,000 was apparently a story now, a narrative that could be steered with a shrug. I thought of the hours behind those numbers. The winter afternoons with a calculator and a pot of tea going warm to cold on the stove. The way Margaret used to rest her palm on my shoulder and say, "Check it once more, Tom, then sign." Stephanie leaned on the counter, her perfume pushing a sweet edge into the air. "One ticket is nothing compared to dignity," she said lightly, and the lightness made it cruel. "Why create a spectacle?" Her eyes softened in that way that makes you look unreasonable simply for existing. "We're all trying to enjoy a beautiful evening." Jers weighed under my hand like a small, steady animal. Peter doesn't argue. It waits. Claire cleared her throat. It does say the amount, she offered, as if narrating a game no one had taught her to play. And the date is 2 days ago? Mark tipped his head. Right, Claire. And what we're saying is, that's a separate matter. He gestured toward the ticket list. For entry, we have a process. We need individual confirmation. It's about fairness to the other guests. Fairness. The word floated up again, polished as a coin. Behind us, the line shifted, the whisper of fabrics, a cough, the polite ballet of people pretending not to watch while watching everything. Someone in an ill-fitting suit smiled at me with sympathy that felt like gauze. It softened nothing and stuck to the wound. "I'm not asking for a favor," I said. "I'm asking you to see what's in front of you." I tapped the cleared stamp, the numbers that would follow me all the way to sleep. This paid for the hall, the food, the music. The very process you're defending was purchased with this. Mark's laugh didn't carry, it only shimmered. "Dad, please, you're making it awkward for everyone." He turned toward the crowd. "He gets this way, details tangle. We all know how it goes." Teeth like heat rose in my chest, though the air by the counter was cool. Age gives you 2 clocks, the one on the wall and the one that ticks in the bone. Both felt loud just then. I thought of the morning I walked the check to the branch, the way the teller had stamped and slid and smiled. I thought, paper is a quiet ally, but it doesn't desert you. Stabilize you with a phone again, I said, or with your inventions. If you intend to say my gift was for you alone, say it. Say it in front of them, in front of her. I nodded toward Claire, who swallowed. Mark lifted a shoulder, performed a sigh. "It was for me," he said easily, "to stabilize some things. We discussed that." He placed a friendly hand on the counter, as if to apologize to the building for my presence. "This," he gestured at the list, the scanner, the gilded doors, "is separate." The air in my lungs went thin. Stephanie watched me with an expression that would photograph well, composed concern. "Mr. Carter," she murmured, "don't let pride cost you a family celebration. Let's resolve this gracefully." Grace had a wordless definition once. My wife's hand slipping into mine when I misstepped. the soft correction no one else saw. I straightened. The ache in my shoulder pulsed to the rhythm of the band's warm-up. "Grace," I said, "isn't asking a man to pretend he didn't pay for your chair." Silence opened. It felt round, like a bowl you could place things in. Mark filled it first. "You're embarrassing yourself," he said, and smiled as though he were forgiving me already. People don't need instructions to choose a side. They need an easy story. Theirs was simple. A confused old man making a scene. A dutiful son managing a delicate situation. I could feel the decision settle over the group, a soft blanket tucking me out of view. "Sir," Claire said, polite to the quick, "if you can just show the individual ticket confirmation." "I have one," I said. "I have this." I tapped the ledger again. It might as well have been a feather. I gathered the papers, aligning their edges like a man rehearsing control in small things, and slid them back into the ledger. As I did, a shadow moved closer, the warmth of a body entering my small square of air. I didn't turn fast enough to dodge it. A hand came down in a quick, neat pat where pain had already bloomed. Mark's palm landed lightly on my bruised shoulder. He leaned in and whispered, "Don't challenge me." Thomas left the hall, the old man's silhouette swallowed by neon light. The doors sighed, shut behind me, and the noise of the ballroom thinned to a distant shimmer. Laughter, cutlery, the practice cheer of a band hitting a perfect note for people who had not seen what happened at the threshold. Night air touched my face with the cool of a wet stone. I held on to it as if temperature itself could steady a man. By the time I reached home, the sky had turned the color of cooled ash. The living room waited the way rooms do when they have learned your footsteps. The lamp by the window, the dustless square where my coffee mug usually sits, the framed photo of Margaret on the table, her smile forever paused between warning and kindness. I shrugged out of my jacket with care. The ache in my shoulder answered like an old bell. I sat in the armchair by the window, my place, the fabric worn smooth where my hands rest, and pressed fingers into the muscle that had slammed the doorframe. A bruise will bloom there by morning. Even now I could feel the skin tightening, heat collecting under it. The pain had its own clock. With my other hand, I reached for the journal tucked beneath the lamp and a pen that still remembered how my fingers used to be steadier. Before ink, memory, it came in small, accurate images. The day I paid off a bleak stack of bills for Mark's first apartment, the night we sold the second car to make a treatment copay on time, Margaret counting pills into a paper cup, then touching my wrist to make me breathe slower. The winter I taught extra classes to cover summer classes he didn't finish. I remembered his voice on the phone, years ago, when he was still shy about asking, and mine answering yes before he could shape the last syllable. How long have I endured without boundaries? The question rose without my permission, phrased itself with the careful grammar a lifetime of grading essays had taught me. I thought of all the times I had called forgiveness patience when it was simply fear, fear of losing him, fear of being alone with my own echo. The house made its evening noises, the heater ticking, a neighbor's car door, the gentle groan of wood remembering a hotter day. I opened the journal. The first line landed like a nail driven straight and true. "Today my son struck me." I sat back and read it, once, then again, as if repetition could file the sentence into the exact shape of what it meant. Words do not bruise, but they witness. Paper does not raise a hand, but it remembers. I wrote a second line, short even, about the push, the doorway, the faces turned away. I noted the time because that is what an honest account deserves. I wrote Margaret's name not as a complaint, not to summon her, but because the person who taught me to keep records also taught me that truth, without tenderness, becomes a ledger of debts. The page looked steadier than my breath felt. Set the pen down and let the armchair hold me. Outside, the neon from the corner market threw a faint pink tide across the ceiling and then withdrew. I could almost believe I heard Margaret's slippers on the hallway runner, that small whispering sound, and then her voice, low. "Set a boundary, Tom. Love is not the absence of lines, it is the courage to draw them." My shoulder throbbed in agreement. I folded the journal closed and placed it beside her photograph. The room, having listened, grew quiet again, like a good friend. I reached for the landline handset to check that it still worked. An old habit. Storms, power flickers, The practical rituals that make an old man feel less at the mercy of weather and people alike. The landline rang. The bank's number lit up. "Linda from the bank." The line was clear, efficient, the voice of fluorescent light and polished counters. I pictured the branch as it would be at mid-morning, screens glowing a cool white, printers breathing out rectangles of certainty, a tray of pens chained to the desk like small blue anchors. "I'm calling to confirm your check," she said. "45,000. It cleared." The words settled me like a hand on a shoulder that didn't hurt. I asked if I could come in. 10 minutes later, I was at her window, the glass reflecting my line face back at me, the sleeve over my tender shoulder sitting a little awkwardly. Linda was younger than I'd imagined from the phone, late 30s maybe, but she had the steadiness I associate with good tellers. Patient eyes, crisp motions, the habit of repeating the important parts. "I can print the transaction detail," she said. "Amount, date, payee, bank stamp." She glanced at me, then at the queue behind, making sure neither of us felt rushed. Paper came warm from the printer, faintly smelling of toner and heat. She slid it across with the back of her fingers so we wouldn't smudge the ink. There it was. Numbers in their uniforms, my name in full, the check's path from my account to the event company. A seal in the corner gave it a kind of small sovereignty. "I'll need a second copy," I said, "for the church office." Regas, another breath from the machine. She clipped the pages neatly. "Do you want a teller's signature on these?" She reached for a stamp anyway. The thump of rubber on paper was more reassuring than I expected. I steadied the stack with my good hand. "Thank you," I said, because thank you is a way to breathe without drawing attention to it. Around us, the branch kept its measured tempo, coins rattling in a sorter, a child asking if money weighs more when it belongs to someone rich, a manager reminding a trainee to offer envelopes. Linda hesitated. Then she lowered her voice, leaning just enough that the glass didn't catch the sound. "If you need me to verify this to anyone," she said, "I will, in writing, if necessary." I met her eyes. Witness is a small word until you need one. "I may ask you," I said. She nodded, then looked to the side as if measuring whether to say more. When she spoke again, it was almost a whisper. The words careful, reluctant to bruise. "Last night I heard Mark say you're getting forgetful. Thomas, I need a word with you." Pastor Daniel's voice was gentle but deliberate, a note that traveled differently inside the wooden ribs of the church. The sanctuary was quiet that afternoon, long after the last hymn had faded. Candles still glowed at the altar, their light bending against stained glass that painted the floor in fractured reds and blues. I stood in the aisle, hat in my hand, and nodded for him to lead the way. We moved to a side chapel, away from the murmur of lingering parishioners. The door clicked softly behind us. He gestured to a pew, its wood smooth with decades of confessions. My shoulder ached as I lowered myself, the bruise beneath my jacket pulsing in rhythm with my heart. Pastor Daniel sat across from me, folding his hands in the old way, thumbs pressed together as if steadying a bridge. "I saw the invoices," he said. His voice had weight, not loud but built from trust. "The hall, the catering, the music, all covered by a check from your account. $45,000 clear as daylight." For a moment, I could only look at the floor, tracing the grain in the wood that seemed to stretch endlessly forward. Relief mixed with shame. Relief that someone else knew, shame that it had come to this. "Mark insists otherwise," I said at last. My voice sounded small in the hush of the chapel, swallowed by the silence that always follows truth. Daniel leaned closer. "You don't need to fight every word, Thomas. Let the truth speak when the time is right." His tone carried the patience of seasons, snow melting, crops growing, the slow certainty that some things arrive without force. "I have the documents. If it comes to it, I will say so openly." The words settled around me like a protective cloak. For the first time in days, my shoulders eased, though the bruise still complained. I remembered Margaret's habit of lighting a candle even when we weren't in church, her belief that flame itself was a kind of testimony. I thought of her now, her absence loud in places like this, her presence still sharp when I faced my son's cruelty. "Spectacle," I whispered. "I only wanted to be there with my family, to sit at the table I helped prepare." Constrained, Daniel's eyes softened. And you will. But you must allow the moment to reveal itself. Pride and anger are noisy. Truth is quieter, but it lasts longer. I nodded, the motion small but steady. My hand brushed against the leather spine of the Bible tucked in the pew rack, its gilt edges worn. Silence swelled again, the kind that makes you listen to your own breathing. Outside the chapel window, wind moved through the branches, their shadows trembling across the glass. He rose, placing a hand lightly on my uninjured shoulder. When the time comes, Thomas, you won't be standing alone. Remember that. Then he left me there, giving me the gift of solitude. Then toward the altar where the crucifix hung, wood against wood, shadow against flame. The candles flickered as if they heard. My throat tightened. I bowed my head. Words rising without effort, words meant only for her. Margaret, I murmured, eyes fixed on the cross. This is the last line I'll allow them to cross. And Pa, I saw what Dad did. Emily's voice came in a whisper, almost lost under the rustle of leaves. The park was quiet in the late afternoon, shadows stretching long across the grass. A fountain gurgled nearby, its water catching the fading light, and I sat on a stone bench that had grown familiar with the weight of lonely men. She stood before me, her hair pulled back, her college sweatshirt loose on her frame, eyes full of something that looked too old for 20 years. I shifted carefully, my shoulders still sore. You saw? What her gaze dropped to her shoes. At the ballroom, I saw him shove you, people laughed. But I knew it wasn't a stumble, it was him. Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands into her sleeves, as if the fabric could steady her. You're confused, she added, almost guiltily. She told me you forget things, that sometimes you remember what didn't happen. Shoal, the words landed heavy, but I'd grown used to them. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the folded bank statement Linda had stamped that morning, and pressed it into her hands. This is proof. 45,000. Paid, not forgotten. Restarted, scanning the lines with wide eyes. The paper looked oversized in her small hands. The numbers had authority, black and absolute. Her lips moved as she read, and I saw the moment understanding cut through the fog her parents had built around her. Grandpa, she whispered, why would they lie like this? Because lies are easier than gratitude, I said quietly, and pride often needs company. Safeguarded up then, eyes bright with unshed tears. If they say you're confused, I'll say I was there. I'll say what I saw. Her hand found mine, warm against my cold fingers. The squeeze carried something both fragile and fierce. I'll tell the truth if it comes to that. I let the moment settle, her promise ringing louder in me than any hymn. My heart steadied, not because the bruise hurt less, but because I was no longer entirely alone in my own family. From across the park, a sharp voice broke the spell. Emily, what are you doing over there? It was Mark. A notification lit my phone. The group chat, usually a dull river of birthday wishes and casserole recipes, had turned into something darker. The message sat at the top, bold and venomous. Thomas Carter lost his mind at the reunion, caused a scene, embarrassed everyone. I scrolled, the screen glowing too bright against the dim of my living room. Stephanie's words multiplied like sparks in dry grass. It was sad to watch. He doesn't know what he's saying anymore. Poor Mark, having to clean up after him. The replies came fast. So sorry you had to deal with that. Is he safe to be alone? Should we consider alternatives? Each line tightened a cord around my chest. In their world, I was no longer a man who had built a family, but a stumbling figure stripped of memory and dignity. Across town, I imagined the scene, Mark pacing their living room, overdue bills stacked in uneven piles, Stephanie tapping manicured nails against her phone as she crafted her story. They were not just managing debt anymore. They were managing perception, and perception in a family like ours was currency. A soft chime broke through the barrage. A new message, not in the group chat, but sent only to me. Emily. A screenshot. My granddaughter's quiet rebellion. I thought you should see this. I don't believe them. The image showed Stephanie's words, captured before they could vanish into the blur of gossip. My hand tightened on the phone, the ache in my shoulder flaring with the tremor that ran down my arm. The lies weren't whispers anymore. They were headlines, broadcast into the pockets of cousins, uncles, and aunts who would carry them to dinner tables and phone calls. each retelling grinding my name thinner. I set the phone down on the table beside Margaret's photograph, her smile frozen in the days when family still meant safety. My breath came ragged, not from age alone, but from the raw heat of betrayal. I opened my palm and stared at the tremor, the skin spotted with time but still mine. Rage and resolve moved through me together, indistinguishable. Slowly I rose and crossed the room. The cabinet creaked when I opened it, the sound of old hinges breaking silence. Inside, in a drawer lined with envelopes, lay the one I had prepared. The folder of bank statements, copies stamped, signatures intact. Proof. Quiet and heavy, waiting for its day. Pulled it free, the weight of paper more solid than the weight of slander. Holding it in my hand, I felt the tremor steady into something else. Determination. This would not end in gossip. This would end in truth. Just sign this, Dad. Everything will be settled. Mark slid the paper across my desk, his tone oily with confidence. The lamplight cast sharp angles on the document, its fine print a forest of traps dressed up in legal language. My hand hovered above it, the ache in my shoulder reminding me of earlier wounds, though this new bruise aimed at something deeper. Stephanie stood near the door, arms crossed, her perfume cutting through the stale evening air. "Don't fight this," she whispered. "You're tired, weak. Let us handle things before you embarrass yourself further." Her words slipped into the dimness like smoke, clinging to every corner of the room. I lowered myself into the armchair, the one that had witnessed my nightly battles with solitude. My fingers brushed the pen Mark had so thoughtfully placed beside the paper. Its click echoed louder than it should have. Position leaned in, tapping the page with a polished fingernail. "Power of attorney," he said. "Just a formality. It gives me the authority to manage your assets. You don't want bills piling up, do you? You don't want confusion to spread." Stephanie, my son, and saw not the boy I raised, but a man who had traded gratitude for entitlement. His eyes shone, not with love, but with hunger. I let my hand tremble, the pen slipping slightly, as though age had robbed me of steadiness. While his gaze followed the pen, I eased my other hand into my pocket, pressing the tiny recorder's switch. A faint red light blinked beneath the fabric of my jacket. My pulse matched its rhythm. Stephanie moved closer, her voice sharpening. "Sign it, Thomas. Once it's done, all this noise ends. No more talk of checks or reunions. You'll finally have peace." Minimi's jaw tightened, impatience surfacing. "Dad," he said low and firm, "once you sign, you won't have anything left to argue about. Nothing. Your role will be over." The words hung in the stale air, naked and cruel. I forced a slow breath, eyes tracing the lines of ink, the false promises. Silence stretched, but inside my pocket the recorder pulsed red, capturing every syllable. And that tiny light, hidden from their sight, became my quietest weapon. The recording played back, Mark's voice ringing clear. It was thinner than it had sounded in the room, compressed into a strip of digital time, but the intent remained intact, each syllable bright as a blade. I sat in the dim living room, with only the lamp by the window burning, the rest of the house surrendered to shadow. The red light on the recorder had gone dark. Now its little screen ticked through his words as if counting off a debt. I let it run once without interruption, then started it again and began to write. I dated the page, I noted the hour. I transcribed phrases exactly. No about, no roughly, no forgiveness in the lines. Once you sign, you won't have anything left to argue about, nothing. Your role will be over. I underlined that last sentence, slow, deliberate as though scoring wood. When the recording ended, I rewound and listened a third time to make sure memory and machine agreed. Then I stood, careful with the shoulder, and turned the lamp so it shade through more light on the couch. I took out my phone and photographed the bruise the way a surveyor maps land. Different angles, steady distance, the same neutral face in the frame. The skin had gone from dusk purple to something darker at the center, a coin of hurt stamped into me. I took one shot beside the recorder and another with the day's newspaper in view. Dates matter. Paper matters. Together, they begin to sound like certainty. I added the photographs to the file in the manila envelope. Bank statements, copies with stamps, a handwritten log. The folder felt heavier than it should have. Perhaps weight can be borrowed from the past. On the desk, Margaret's picture watched me with that familiar half-smile, the one that could lift a burden without remarking on it. I pulled a single sheet of good paper from the drawer and began the letter in my neatest hand. Punitive or Daniel, please safeguard this file. I described plainly what the audio contained and where the images were taken, how the check had cleared, and when the bruise had bloomed. I did not ask him to judge. I asked him to keep faith with the facts. When I finished, I read the letter aloud, not for effect, but to hear how the sentences stood when they had to carry their own weight. The room held them. The heater clicked once. In the next room, the clock that had kept our kitchen punctual for years made its soft, stubborn tick. We as evidence, I whispered to the dark. And now I have a voice too. I sealed the envelope and set it beside the file, a simple barricade between us and the storm to come. Outside, a car passed, throwing a sweep of light across the curtains. I switched off the recorder, then placed it with the other things that mattered, a small constellation on the desk. Pen, ledger, photographs, letter. Safeguard House listened with me. Then came the interruption I did not expect. Gentle but urgent, knuckles speaking against wood. A sudden knock at the door. Emily appears. "Grandpa, I'll stand with you." Emily's voice trembled as much as her hands, but the words landed solid in the quiet house. The rain tapped gently at the windows, beads of water racing down the glass, the night pressing close around us. I motioned her inside, closing the door against the storm and against the fear in her eyes. She dropped her soaked jacket on the chair, her hair damp at the edges. "Dad told me not to speak. He said if I said anything about what I saw, he'd make me regret it." Her lips tightened as if the words themselves could burn. From the pocket of her jeans, she pulled her phone, screen glowing in the dim. She swiped, then showed me a set of screenshots. The group chat messages where Stephanie's lies had blossomed. "Thomas is confused. He's ruining everything, embarrassing himself." The proof was stark, pixel by pixel. The malice of gossip captured and frozen. I took the phone carefully, my fingers brushing hers, then nodded toward the manila envelope waiting on my desk. "These lies don't hold forever. The truth will guard you, Emily. It will guard us both." She communicated at me with wet lashes, searching my face for hesitation. I gave her my hand. She squeezed it, small fingers against knotted veins, and whispered, "I'll speak if I have to, in front of everyone. I won't let him erase what I saw." The lamp lit her profile in warm gold, and for a moment Margaret's voice rose in me. "Trust the young. Sometimes they carry more courage than we think." Emily straightened her shoulders. The tremble in her voice had hardened into resolve. "I'll tell the truth, Grandpa. I promise." Brushed were both fragile and immense, binding her to a path she could not easily step back from. I felt a quiet pride that outweighed the ache in my shoulder. "Tong." Then my phone lit up on the desk. A new message scrolled across the screen in stark black letters. "Tomorrow, face to face." Thomas Carter's lost his mind. The words sat at the top of the family group chat, bold as a headline, echoed by 3 quick replies of agreement. At the corner table of a downtown cafe, Mark and Stephanie watched their story ripple outward. Stephanie's nails tapped the phone screen, sending carefully chosen phrases. "He caused a scene. Couldn't even remember what the money was for." It was heartbreaking to watch. Around the table, 2 cousins nodded, their coffees untouched. "Well, it's not surprising," one said. "He's been alone too long. Age does that." The judgment carried a lazy certainty, the kind that comes easier than asking questions. Mark leaned back, arms folded, letting Stephanie take the lead. She played the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law, lowering her voice, tilting her head just right. "We've tried so hard with him. But maybe it's time for a professional care." The implication hung in the air, heavier than the steam rising from their mugs. Emily sat at the edge, her phone trembling in her grip. "That's not true," she said softly. "I was there." He wasn't confused. The words barely left her lips before Stephanie's eyes snapped toward her, sharp as broken glass. "Enough," Stephanie hissed. "Don't contradict your father." The cafe's low hum seemed to pause. Even the barista at the counter glanced over. Emily shrank into her chair, biting down on the truth that threatened to spill out again. On another phone screen, far from the cafe, Pastor Daniel scrolled through the same thread. He read each line with care, his brow tightening as he recognized the rhythm of slander dressed as concern. He didn't add to the noise. Instead, he pressed the side button, capturing screenshots one by one, his silence speaking louder than their words. Later that evening, a new message arrived on my phone, from Daniel. "Come early tomorrow. I'll stand beside you." The glow of the screen lit the envelope of evidence on my desk, and for the first time in weeks, I felt less alone in the storm. "You're destroying this family," Mark's roar cracked the evening air as he lunged forward, his hand clamping around my wrist. The phone slipped, his grip prying at my fingers, nails biting into skin. We were in the backyard, the last light of dusk slanting across the fence, the garden soil damp with a recent drizzle. "Mark, stop!" Emily's voice cut through the thud of our struggle, but he was past listening. His weight drove me backward, and when I fell, the pain shot white-hot through my shoulder as it hit the ground. The bruise already there screamed anew, spreading fire through bone and muscle. Youette lingered by the back door, her arms folded, watching without stepping closer. "Just give him the phone, Thomas," she said, her tone cold, distant, as though the scene before her was an inconvenience to be tidied away. I tried to speak, to tell him this wasn't the way, but the words caught in my throat. The phone skittered across the patio stones, screen flashing with unanswered texts. Emily rushed past her mother's frozen stance, crouching to help me, her hands trembling as they pressed against my good arm. "Get off him," she screamed at her father, her voice carrying farther than the fence line. A neighbor's porch light flicked on. Another window opened. Voices rose from across the yard, questions sharp with alarm. The siren came sooner than I expected, its rising wail slicing through the neighborhood calm. Mark finally released me, his chest heaving, sweat shining under the porch light. Two officers stepped through the gate, their presence immediate, commanding. "What's going on here?" one asked, already pulling a notepad free. Emily pointed at Mark, words spilling out. "He shoved Grandpa. He tried to take his phone. He keeps hurting him." Her voice cracked, but it carried the undeniable ring of truth. The officers separated us, one steadying me to my feet, the other holding Mark back as he sputtered excuses. "Just a family misunderstanding," he muttered, his eyes darting to the fence where neighbors now gathered, silent witnesses. Officer's pen moved quickly, scratching black lines onto white paper. His voice was neutral, but the phrase he wrote down was not. "Suspected elder abuse." The words landed heavier than fists, heavier than bruises. I stood unsteady, Emily at my side, and watched the scene shift from private violence to public record. The officer closed his notebook, his expression firm. "Mr. Carter, you'll receive notice soon. There will be a mediation hearing." My word hung in the cooling air, hearing, a new battleground forming in the open. Take Pastor Daniel tapped the microphone, the sound cracking through the church hall until all the chatter died down. "We need the truth," he said, his voice steady beneath the vaulted ceiling. The long tables stretched across the room, filled with family faces, some tight with anger, others restless with curiosity. The light from stained glass fell in fractured colors across the polished floor, an ironic beauty against the tensions saturating the air. Mark rose first, smoothing his shirt with unnecessary bravado. "My father isn't well," he announced. "He confused generosity with entitlement. He disrupted our reunion, embarrassed all of us. It's time we admitted he's slipping." Stephanie's approving nod followed, her arm brushing his, as though they were presenting a united front at trial. A low murmur passed through the room, agreement and doubt blending into one indistinct hum. I stayed seated, waiting, my hand resting lightly on the manila folder before me. Emily sat at my side, her chin lifted, silent but fierce. When Mark's words ended, I rose, slower than I once might have, but steady all the same. "If I am confused," I said quietly, "then let us test memory against record." From the folder, I drew the first sheet, a printed bank statement, the numbers circled in red. $45,000 cleared 2 days before the reunion. Mark scoffed, a harsh laugh. "He thinks waving paper makes him right?" I reached again, this time producing the small recorder. With a single press, Mark's own voice filled the hall. "Once you sign, you won't have anything left to argue about. Nothing. Your role will be over. His words, captured and undeniable, ricocheted against the stone walls. Gasps rippled through the family. I let the silence after it linger, heavy as judgment. Pastor Daniel stepped forward then, holding a set of invoices, his glasses low on his nose. I can confirm this. Every dollar of that check was used to pay for the hall, the food, the music you all enjoyed. Without Thomas Carter's sacrifice, there would have been no reunion. The hall fell utterly still. Even the hum of the old heater seemed to pause. Dozens of eyes shifted one by one away from me and squarely onto Mark. His face flushed, jaw tightening, hands balling into fists. The bravado cracked into fury. He slammed his palm against the table and shouted, voice raw, "This is a setup, a trap to smear me." "I saw it," Emily said, her voice trembling but firm as she rose to her feet. "I saw my father hit my grandfather." The words cut through the church hall like a bell tolling at midnight. Heads turned, whispers rippled, and every eye locked on Mark. The air thickened. Mark's jaw clenched, but no denial came quick enough to erase the crack in his facade. Stephanie's hand twitched toward his arm, then fell, her mask of loyalty slipping. Pastor Daniel lifted a hand, quieting the murmurs. "Let us hear the rest," he said, nodding toward me. With deliberate calm, I pressed play on the recorder. Mark's voice filled the silence again, cruel and unmistakable. "Once you sign, you won't have anything left to argue about. Nothing. Your role will be over." The hall seemed to close in on him, walls of witness that no lie could breach. Emily's eyes glistened but did not waver as she added, "He told me to keep quiet. He said Grandpa was confused. But it wasn't confusion, it was abuse." Pastor Daniel's tone carried no anger, only certainty. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is not a lapse. What we have witnessed is abuse." His words settled like a gavel strike, final and undeniable. I rose, my legs steady under me, and faced my son. "There will be no more checks, Mark. No more excuses. If you want to be my son again, it begins not with money, but with respect." The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. Mark's face crumpled, his defiance unraveling. For the first time, he seemed stripped of performance. His shoulders sank, and before all who had watched, he broke. Tears welled, spilling as he bowed his head. The man who had shoved, shouted, and schemed now stood undone before the weight of truth. Morning light stretched across the living room, warm and forgiving, touching the fabric of my old armchair, where I sat with a steaming cup of tea. The silence was not heavy this time. It was whole, unbroken, almost sacred. The world outside had quieted after weeks of storms, and here in my small corner, peace had returned. On the table beside me lay the manila envelope, edges worn from being handled too often. Inside were the bank statements, the recorder, the photographs of bruises, and the pages of my journal. I slid them into a larger envelope, sealed it carefully, and placed it in the safe tucked into the corner of the room. The truth was no longer a weapon I needed to wield. It had already done its work. I turned to the photograph on the mantel. Margaret's smile looked back at me, timeless, eyes bright with a love that had never faltered. "I kept my promise," I whispered, voice low but certain. "I drew the line. I didn't let him take everything." My hand lingered on the frame, the memory of her steady presence grounding me. The phone on the armrest buzzed. A message appeared, stark against the screen. "I'm sorry, Dad. Please give me one more chance. Dinner, just you and me." Mark's words carried no bravado this time, no demand, only the weight of regret. I breathed slowly, feeling the corners of my mouth lift. Not triumph, not gloating. Something quieter, gentler, dignity reclaimed. The battle fought not with fists but with truth, with patience, with boundaries. Another message chimed almost immediately after. Emily's name lit the screen. "I'll visit this afternoon, Grandpa." Set the phone down, cradled the cup of tea in my palms, and let the morning light rest on me, on the chair, on the photograph. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt like home. Justice had not come with noise or spectacle, but with the quiet certainty of truth laid bare. What began as humiliation in a crowded hall ended in the unmasking of deceit and the restoration of dignity long denied. Justice may arrive late, but it resonates like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, reminding us that silence in the face of abuse is never the answer. Sometimes one voice and one choice are enough to pierce the fog of betrayal. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you resonate with this story.